Namaste.
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 So I can't remember if I said that already for you who are joining us online, but everyone here got informed that we are moving to India. And this came about because K.K. Saha, who is one of the devotees, very close devotees of my guru, invited us to stay with him in his house for a year, where he's going to teach Durga devotional singing, and I can just incubate myself there in this incredible space. So I just 2 hours ago talked to Ramdas about it and told him about this invitation and that we're going, and he was really happy for us because this is where he lived, in KK's house, after long before he wrote Be Here Now. He was in India, he had met Maharaji, and he then was given by Maharaji to KK to take care of, and he lived in KK's house. And it's this cocoon of just an incredible quality. There, upstairs in the top floor of the house, there's a room where for the last 2 generations, or I don't know how you count generations, but for the last, KK is 80-ish, and when he was a child, this was already happening. The great sages of this area, which is the Kuma and the Himalaya, that's where all the great sages, or many of them, chose to live. So when they was to come through Nainital, they would always go to KK's house because his father was a great devotee. And so they stayed in the upstairs room, and KK was there as a kid growing up at their feet, basically. And then Ramdas stayed with him and so on. And Ramdas was just saying how special that is, that invitation. It was the mind blower for us. So we're really happy to do this. And I want you to know that we're going to continue our programs. But of course, once we leave Miami, they're going to change a little bit because we won't be meeting here with a live satsang. What we're going to do now is we're going to start a second program where we don't meet here. It's purely online, and everyone can participate and write in questions, request to be like interviewed on the program. And interviewed, don't worry, it's not like I'm going to ask you questions. It's like if you have something that you want to change in your life, you can tell me about it, whether it's of a spiritual nature or not. And then we can discuss how this can be best done using the different skills that we're teaching and so on. So that'll be available free of charge pretty soon. We don't know exactly when it starts. Stay tuned on the newsletter. The news will come out through the newsletter. And that we will continue in India, and perhaps we can get KK to participate in that, and we'll have some great sessions with this extraordinary being who has the boon to always remain a child. So he's now in his 80s. And to be a child in this spiritual way is really the most special thing. You know how Jesus said, what he said about the children, let the children come to me because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So he has that simplicity and this really profound devotion. And I would be just thrilled to introduce him to all of you and to sort of tease some of that out of him, make him show the really precious quality of his heart. So that's coming up. We're still going to be here for several months. We don't know exactly when we're going. We're assuming it's going to be end of July or August or something like that. But we'll know when the time gets closer. So now I'd like to go back to something we discussed last time, which is this transition from one state of being into the next. In other words, from one dimension of life into a greater dimension. This is distinctly different from sort of linear learning. We learn something, then we know more, but we're basically still in the same kind of consciousness internally. When you go from one state of consciousness into the next higher state of consciousness, there's a profound shift. And in many ways, things are quite different in the new state. And some of you are nodding, so I know you've been through this. Now, the process is interesting to study. The process that we go through as individuals when we're in a certain state of awareness, and that has become old, like the soul is ready to evolve, and it's struggling, or sometimes struggling, to get into the next higher state, right? So there are stages to that, and it's really good to know what they are, because it makes it much easier. It's like you have a map, an understanding of what you're going through, right? The map that we're using, that this understanding comes from, was explored in depth by a great writer named Stan Grof. He's a psychiatrist and a deeply spiritual being and leader. And he has studied what's known as perinatal psychology. This is perinatal, means the psychology around birth. But he's gone far beyond what psychology sort of is generally. So he studied the stages of birth, what the fetus goes through as it's in the process of being born. And it turns out that these stages are something that we relive throughout a lifetime. And in this sense, sort of death and birth are just two sides of the same door, right? When you're leaving that space, the space where you've been, you're going through that door. That for you, that's the death of the ego that you used to be, right? But on the other side, looking from the other side, it's the birth into that greater realm, that greater dimension. So the stages of birth are as follows. When the fetus is very little, it's swimming in the uterus, and there's like plenty of room, and it's just having this great time. It's like oceanic bliss, and everything's just hunky-dory. And then the fetus, or you as a being, you grow and you fill out that space. You've kind of explored this dimension of your being. And suddenly there's like no more room to grow, and something inside of you is going to get antsy. Now, for instance, if you're in a relationship at that time, it's very likely that you're looking at the relationship saying, something's not working here. I need something else. That's when people have affairs and all kinds of stuff. Not a good way of doing it. But sometimes it just happens. It's inevitable, right? So we work with what we've got. But you get kind of tight. Something has to shift and you don't know what. And we're so trained to always look outside, to look for the reason of the problem or the cause of the problem outside of us. So now it's got to be your spouse, or it's got to be your job or something, and it's not. It's internal. Something inside of you has to shift, right? So here you are, back to the fetus image, right? And you've kind of filled up the space that's available, and you're still there, but it's sort of not quite right. And then suddenly something absolutely awful happens. The walls of your world start caving in. And that's the metaphor of birth, right? That's the beginning of labor, right? Imagine you're the fetus, and you're in this little place that was like heaven for a long time, and suddenly it goes and just squeezes the hell out of you. That's a time, and there's no exit available. The birth canal's still closed, right? It's just this tremendous pressure. And when people go through that in real life, like in a relationship or so, you can get panicky. You can get like really freaked out. My God, what's happening? And I can't help myself, and something terrible is going to happen, and all of that kind of catastrophic fantasy starts setting in. So at that point, it's really helpful to understand how this story, this movement from state to state is going to continue. Because you've been through it a billion times in many lifetimes, both in terms of physical birth and in terms of the evolution of your soul. You've been through it countless times. And billions of other people, of other beings have been through it countless times. So it's perfectly safe and it's mapped out and we can know what it is. So there's not really a reason for us to freak out about it, right? When we see the larger picture. So let's say you're in this place where something has to change and it gets really tight and uncomfortable. And there's no way out. It's not visible yet how this situation will resolve itself. Do you relate to this? Have you gone through this? Yeah, it's very common, right? We know those kind of states. So what you need to know is how this process of transcending the current limitations of your situation is going to occur, right? First is the state of pressure and no way out, right? Now don't freak out. Know that that's going to just be like that for a little while. Work with your mind, work with your emotions, get as peaceful as you can. Don't think that the external situation that you're facing is the primary problem. It may be a problem, but the primary problem is always inside here. And here it's manageable. Out there may not be manageable. Here you can always manage. You can manage your mind, you can manage your emotions, and you can know what's going to happen here. So beginning of labor is that state when the walls of your world start caving in. But then after a while of this, the birth canal starts to open. So a way out starts to become visible. So it's not so claustrophobic anymore. You're not through yet, right? You're not out in the new state. But the pressure now starts to take on a direction. It's no longer just pressure pushing in from all sides. Now you're able to move in a direction. Now, if you know birth, well, there's blood and guts. It's sort of a violent process in many ways. And we've gone through this kind of stuff in our lives. It's like you're in a relationship and the relationship has become too small. And you're too small in the relationship. That's why you have a relationship that's too small, right? So it's both, right? And you need to grow. You need to grow bigger. So then you push up against the relationship and some realignment has to happen with you and this other person. And that's absolutely possible. Like I said, it's happened billions and billions and trillions of times, both in terms of the physical birth experience and any other birth like that, death, birth situation. So what creates problems now is the attachments that we have, the attachments to how it used to be. It used to be so nice, and I want that back. And the point is you can't go back. Some Greek philosopher, I think, said, you can't ever step in the same river twice. You cannot go back. Time doesn't rewind. You have to go forward. And you have to also understand that this is such a universal process that the outcome will be better than you can imagine, because the fetus cannot imagine what it's like to be a breathing human being, right? It just cannot, not on your map yet, right? But this transition into the greater state is already programmed in. And, we think, oh, I have to do this and I have to struggle. And, you just have to make sure that you don't get in the way of this process. How do we get in the way of the process? without stressful thoughts, the patterns of emotional reactivity and all that kind of stuff, you know? So then we need to just take out the garbage, clear the mind, bring the emotions into harmony, and things are gonna just go smoother that way. It's like you're helping the birth to be easier if you're not holding on to the way it was, right? So let yourself be flushed through in that new state. And often there are big changes involved. Like I said, blood and guts in the process of birth. But it's all for a good reason. It's not an illness. It's important to realize that, because the part of you that's in the process of dying off is screaming bloody murder. No, I don't want this, you know, because that's your attachment to the old way. But the process will take you through this birth canal into this new state. We talked about this succession of rooms, right? You're in a room a certain size. It means your understanding, your consciousness is in a certain dimension, a state that you've been used to, you've been in it for a while. And when it comes time, there's this doorway, you know, and it looks like death from this side, looks like birth from the other side, and you're going through that. And it's perfectly safe. It's perfectly safe to die and be reborn, right? In our materialistic culture, of course, we have this idea that when you die, you disappear. Well, I have news for you. We're still all here, and we've been through this process, God knows, gazillion times, right? So we don't just disappear. Even the most realized sage still has a sense of identity. It may be very refined, and it may be totally transparent for that sage, but it's still a way to live in this world and to pay your traffic tickets and, you know, do everything else you need to do. What you're leaving behind is all the heavy stuff that you don't need. That's never really worked for you anyway. So when you wiggle yourself through that birth canal, then comes the state of emergence into the new life. You know, so emerging into this new room, this larger room. And that's like really exciting. Now we're going to have a whole new universe to explore. And here is what happens when people are not strongly focused on enlightenment. They can spend lifetimes in this new dimension now. They can say, yeah, there's just incredible things here. So like subtle realities on high astral or causal planes. You can spend lifetimes there and not be liberated. So when you have the desire for liberation, know that there's a certain amount of rooms, like, you know, bigger dimensions, in the process of the maturation of the soul. And at one point, there's the last door. This is not the last death and you disappear. No, it's just that you're born into the outdoors. No longer a room, right? That's true liberation. It's just a metaphor to speak about enlightenment, right? So when you find yourself in a certain dimension of being, as we all do, what we can do is have this singular desire to get into the next room, and from there into the next room, and from there into the next room, until there's no more room to get through. So what that means is to be singularly focused on enlightenment itself, and not get fascinated with stuff. And stuff can't truly be fascinating. You know, in the symbolical language of this sublime psychology of being that is the Eastern philosophy, the Eastern scriptures, they talk about the goddess with her 1,000 veils. And she dances the dance of Maya, and we get entranced because she's so beautiful. She's like incredible. And we get wrapped into these veils. And we can spend long periods of time there. but it's not freedom. Freedom, you have to even go beyond her altogether. And this goes whether you're a man or a woman. You have to go beyond her to find that in you is the very source of all of that. You have to find enlightenment, which means what? You have to find yourself. You have to find the real core of your being. Now, when you get to that place, there is the possibility of your spirit, your soul, merging into the light of God, and just simply merging into it and disappearing into the light of God, into the love of God. Or you can maintain an apparent separate identity. I said earlier that a sage still has an ego, but he may not be fooled by it, or she may not be fooled by it. So it's a semblance of an ego. From outside, it looks like, yeah, a functioning person. From inside, there's nobody home. And in that state of nobody home, if the Supreme decides that you're going to retain some type of individual sense of self, you then exist in a realm that we call the realm of the sages, or the Buddha realm. And this is not a realm that is subject to illusion, to forgetting that you're really one with the Supreme. You live there in a realm of dimension upon dimension, of increasing dimensions of love. And there's no end to that depth. There's no end to that bliss, the bliss of God. So even after enlightenment, we have the option to maintain this kind of an identity. Now that's really the idea of the Bodhisattva in Buddhism, but it's not something that the Buddhists have a patent on. This is something that is available for any being, regardless of their belief system, who becomes free. But since that being is no longer a somebody who makes independent decisions, that being is fully surrendered. And so whatever happens to the soul, whether it dissolves itself in the light of God, or whether it retains some sense of individuality that it can see through, and perhaps for the service of, for the sake of service of other beings, that remains up to the Supreme. And the soul is perfectly willing to bow to whatever that decision is. You no longer have an attachment to remaining somebody concrete. Right? It's much more on a subtle plane. So I just wanted to lay this out, and I spoke about this realm of the sages for a particular reason. Because we all still deal with ego itself, not with a totally transparent ego, but with ego that wants to be somebody. And when that ego hears this idea of enlightenment, it gets very excited. And of course, the ego tries to take over this idea of enlightenment and say, well, if I'm enlightened, then I'll be super ego. And I'll be really the king of the mountain, you know? So that's, of course, a sort of infantile way that the ego reacts to this idea. Then you work with this for a little while, and you understand that it's really a different game, that you get to become lighter and lighter and lighter, and less of a concrete something that is separate from God, or separate from the flow of life. And when you sort of understand that, and I think that's where we're all at here, then there's still, in most of us, some place that's a little hesitant that says, enlightenment is like totally dissolving myself into the light of God. I don't know about that. Because there's still this attachment to being somebody. So when we know that we can have that attachment of being somebody, and it's not something we have to kill, it's there for a reason. Maybe it's there for the reason not of having to be somebody who suffers all the time, which is what we have known. Maybe it is there because in you is the seed of tremendous compassion. In you there's the potential of being a bodhisattva who chooses to forego ultimate liberation, which is this complete merging into the divine. But maybe in you is someone who says, I'm okay with postponing that, because right now I want to be of service to others. I want to share this amazing gift of the love and the recognition of the divine in me. I want to share that with people who are open and yearning for that knowledge. And of course, this sharing does not have to go, it does not have to take a form of how some people like myself are doing it, where it's sort of a formal thing, like, yeah, I'm offering this spiritual teaching or something. It doesn't have to be like that. You are doing that already. This lightness in you is sharing itself with everyone you meet. And the more conscious you are of yourself and of that essence in you, your deepest heart, the more natural and effortlessly it will share itself.
I don't know if I'm understanding correctly. You said postponing enlightenment for the sake of service of other beings?
Yeah, that's the basic.
Is not the other way around? What we could postpone is the idea of not reincarnating again, but reincarnating again for the sake of other beings. But isn't enlightenment something that will help us serve other beings better?
That's true. So we're bumping up against the limits of language. In language, I can always only describe one thing at a time. And then it seems like this is true, so therefore this must be false, right? It's like this or that. And what we see in spiritual life, increasingly, that it's not this or that, but it's both and. So look at the most obvious example we have in front of our eyes now of a bodhisattva in action is His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who is this being who is incarnated so many times in recognition of his incarnations, and is born into a situation where he's trained from childhood on to be of service to other beings. And he has this tremendous humility and always says, it's like, well, I don't really have it fully. I'm just here to do my work of service so I can get enlightened. Now, I'm not sure that I totally buy that. There may be a very enlightened being in there. But he's showing us something. He's showing us the postponement not of an enlightened consciousness, you see, but of the postponement of the complete dissolving of the soul in the light of God, where you're no longer active as a separate entity of any type. So we can say there's enlightenment for us. Enlightenment for us means that we get over being schmucks. which means what? We get over believing our own stressful thoughts, falling into the same emotional traps again and again. Right? That's our work. That's our practice to work with that stuff. And as we get rid of some of that old conditioning, we get to a place where eventually we will no longer fall back into suffering as a separate human being. The ups and downs of life still go on, but you just don't identify with it anymore. The body may be sick, but if you are speaking from that place of your real experience, you wouldn't say, I'm sick, because you're no longer identified with the body. The identification has shifted. That we have to pursue, and the more clear we are on that, the more our being is of service itself. Clear so far?
Yeah, so
Right.
someone like
Well,
Baron Katie.
Let me add something to that. When we get to that place where we're no longer the slaves of our stressful thoughts, the slaves, locked into our own mind that believes it's a separate entity, but we're really feeling the oneness with everything. And the great love is freed up that's inside of all of us. Then there are still many more stages of subtler and subtler dimensions of love that we can experience. And a being who stays in apparent separation from the ultimate merging can experience this ongoing growth through dimension and dimension, rather than dissolving themselves completely. Now, you were going to say something and use the example of Katie.
I just don't understand that dissolving completely. What does that? Can you practically say someone who has dissolved into the divine completely? So I'm I want some evidence. And second, I like to see someone I've understood as enlightenment as being, as you said, not falling back into suffering. So a being that I met that is like that, to me, is Baron Katie. To me, she's enlightened. She have found that great depth, not only of mind, but of heart.
Yeah.
And then she's putting all that wisdom into the service of humanity. To me, it's equally like Dalai Lama, right?
Yeah.
What does one human being do beyond that? What is that merging into divine mean, right, if not already is merged?
So that human being, what you call a human being, right? First of all, I'm not sure she would agree with that she's a human being. That's how we see her. Her experience is that she is consciousness itself, which is absolutely limitless. And inside of that consciousness, a world appears with a being in it. So it's it's like a flip of awareness that happens here, right? Now that consciousness is timeless, it's just there. And in that infinite consciousness, countless worlds appear. Every being is a world in itself. Your world is different from everyone else's world. You just happen to live on the planet with a whole bunch of other people who each have their individual world. Now, a being like Baron Katie, if I can speak for her from my limited perspective, can decide to maintain or to come back into form. In other words, to take on another form on this gross physical plane or some more subtle world. There's all kinds of worlds on different planes. Out of the compassion of the Supreme, which works through that being.
Mm.
Or such a being may go into what in Buddhism is called parinirvana, which means absolute nirvana, extinction of this individual sense of self, and just remain in the absolute bliss of that limitless consciousness. So when we see this beautifully in the Tibetan tradition, because they have studied it so deeply and they have sort of instrumentalized it on this planet. So when a great being like Dilgo Khyentse dies, millions of people are connected to that being in deep love. And what they do is they pray to that being to come back into a form here in this world that we can perceive with our five senses. So that's why they, after he died, they did this thing in the Budnath Stupa, this huge stupa in Kathmandu Valley, and they lit 100,000 butter lamps one night and lit up this whole space as a visible sign of their prayers for him to take another form. And sure enough, he did. That young man is now, I think, around 20 or so. So it's the prayer, because these beings don't have to take a body like we have to take a body because we have attachments. So the attachments crystallize and we're back in another womb. But they don't, they come where they're needed and in a sense where they're wanted, which is the same thing. And so they ask that consciousness of Dilgo Khyentse, and again, I beg forgiveness because I'm talking like I know all of this, but somehow something is coming through. Being like Dilgo Khyentse, who's clearly not identified with his individual body and living entityness, but knows that he is that limitless consciousness. And so his body dissolves and he is again one with his consciousness. But there is this tiny little pea of a planet floating around inside of this universe, aside from any other of the many universes that exist. And there are beings begging him to come back, begging him, who, the old Dilgo Khyentse, no, this vast consciousness. And so this vast consciousness, out of the great compassion of God that is woven into all of creation, slips back into another form and goes through 80 years of a lifetime with suffering and all the ups and downs that the personality goes through. Only these beings, of course, because their soul history is already so involved, they generally become enlightened very quickly. And we see that in Byron Katie's example, Eckhart Tolle's example. They were here and they lived normal lives to get to know this planet. How else are they going to teach us? So they live for a little while, and then a big crisis occurs. Now we're back to that topic, right? So Byron Katie's example, I do use that because I know that intimately from knowing her. So she is like this really sick being at one point. And it's this state of, the walls of her world caving in and tremendous pressure. And she is in this room in the halfway house, and she wakes up one morning and a cockroach crawls over her foot, and all the suffering is gone. And she wakes up in absolute bliss, and she goes to the mirror and she looks at her face, and she cannot really describe what happened. But the words that she uses are just incredible. She saw the presence of the divine when she looked at her face in the mirror. And that has never changed. Now that's a being that doesn't start her sadhana on that level. That's a being who's already done and is coming out of sense of compassion and We can see that on the other end too. So here she is, and she has this momentary sudden enlightenment experience. And with that, she's capable of seeing her mind with absolute clarity. And she realizes that every stressful thought that came up out of the old cache of where her old habitual stressful thoughts were, the cache was still there, you know. All these thoughts would come up, but now she could just see them, and she would look at them, and she saw that they weren't true. And this one isn't true, and this one isn't true, and this one isn't true. So these stressful thoughts and beliefs could no longer embed themselves into what she thought. They just came up and they were seen as not true. And that took probably about 2 years of, just seeing all this old stuff come up and staying in the space of clarity. And then the thoughts just didn't come up anymore because she wasn't feeding them any longer. Now, most of us have the sense, why doesn't something like that happen to me? Well, it doesn't happen because there's a maturation of our incarnation, this person that we are, but there's also a maturation of the soul. And this is just a being who's here for the purpose of serving. And you can see that because she had this ability to see her thoughts, and then out of that, over some time, she was able to make it into this simple and absolutely genius formula of the work of investigating your mind and clearing your mind, which has now, since I met her in 2000, it has gone like a firebrand around the planet. And there's millions of people doing it now because it's so effective. So, that just doesn't happen because Joe Schmo is having a thought of enlightenment, Yeah, Abraham.
I remember either reading from her or her speaking this, and she was actually addressing the very issue of enlightenment, and it was very interesting because as we know, she addresses the thoughts, and she said, and I never forget this, it's like, when you clear your mind from that specific thought, you have enlightenment on that particular situation, and that was very powerful. That we can experience enlightenment in little doses.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. That's the beauty of it. Excuse me. So much is talked about the non-dual state and stuff like that. What we do with this, and this is the big difference of the work from positive thinking or positive affirmations, which is all fine, but it doesn't quite have the punch of the work. Because what you do with the work, you don't take. So here's stressful thinking. You have positive thinking. You have a stressful thought. It's there. And then you say, I shouldn't think this, I should think positively. And that's great, but that's still there. And the positive affirmation, so you have this stressful thought, or maybe it's something like, people cannot be trusted, something like that, right? And you don't like it. So you put, instead of it, you put a positive affirmation. People are lovely and I will trust them, right? And that's good. And it can definitely reduce this, but it's not going to get rid of it completely. It's like sprinkling a little perfume over it, right? That's going to be okay, and it can be helpful for sure. But what we do with the work, we go into this thought, people cannot be trusted, and we examine it. We examine it, and we search for the real truth. What is true here? Yes, we think that. And we may have 3 billion pieces of evidence to back it up. Because when you believe that people cannot be trusted, guess what you're going to see? All the ways they cannot be trusted. And we're not going to be fooled by it. We're going to just look at this thought and we're examining it. And when you get to the place where you see that it just cannot be true, it is not true for you. At that moment, you can no longer believe the thought that people cannot be trusted. And so your universe shifts, and the energy tied up here, and people cannot be trusted, gets released into the non-dual realm. And you can see this issue of trust from a whole different vantage point. Now that vantage point was expressed by Katie by saying, I trust everyone 100%. But then she didn't leave it there. She said, I trust them 100% to be who they are. And it's my job to be clear enough to be able to observe them. And there are some people who I can trust 100% to be who they are. And I wouldn't want to associate with them. But it doesn't shake my trust, you see? Because not only do I trust them who they are, I can then also trust me in my dealings with people. And trusting the goodness of the universe, that everyone is going to give me exactly the right cues, whether they're trustworthy on the lower levels of things, like maybe to follow up on something or to not lie to me or whatever, right? So when you meet a liar, you can trust him 100% to be who he is. And of course, nobody's a liar, it's just a moment. But the moment can be repetitive in people's lives. Does that make them a liar? No. They're just somebody who's in the grip of a delusion. You know, who's confused. That's the worst thing people can ever be accused of, to be confused. Hitler and his people, or whatever other mass murderer you want to pick on, their sin was being confused. And what did they do? What made them do what they did? They believed their own thoughts. And who here can say that that's not true for us, or has never been true? So let's go back to the source, you know? Do you believe everything you think? If you do, you're in trouble. Because thoughts come from God knows where. And a lot of thoughts come, they're not even yours. It's like when you're driving and I used to live in Florida in the middle of the state, in like rural community, you're driving, somebody cuts you off, it's like no big deal, you just slow down, it's like everybody's laid back, everything's fine, right? Then you take the same human being, me, into New York City and somebody cuts me off, like, son of a bitch! You know, I'm going to be in that mind state because the mental energy field around me is so much more dense and uptight, right? I could have used Miami, but I want to be nice. You know? So the stuff that goes to the mind is often not even ours. So we have beliefs that are cultural beliefs, racial beliefs, gender beliefs. All kinds of garbage runs through there.
Family beliefs. Family beliefs, yes.
Don't ever trust a man. This great whole list of family beliefs given to me by an Argentinian woman who told me everything that her mother and grandmother and aunts told her about men and marriage. It was like a prescription for absolute disaster. But you see, back to Katie, this thing about her process of being in this incredible pressure inside of her, this state of being obese and abusive and addicted, and just she had any mental health illness, she had it. And suddenly, boop, in her case, very quickly, she's out of that. Because no state of suffering lasts. And it's only our mind that thinks, oh my God, something terrible is going to happen. I came up with this term just this week, catastrophic fantasy. I worked with a few people who are, really good at this. We create this habit of catastrophic fantasy. And we, of course, don't realize it's fantasy. And so for us, then it appears real because we're not questioning our thinking. And we think this horrible things are going to happen. Or this awful stuff has happened. Which, again, is just fantasy. Your whole past that you're carrying around with you. Is it real? Look at it. You're used to thinking it's real. But is it real or is it fantasy? Well,
It's fantasy.
it's fantasy. Yeah? And our take on the past is really shaky. We think, oh yeah, I know what happened. Well, talk to your siblings and compare notes of what happened in your fantasies. You get in your families, you get very different stories. And we say, oh yeah, it's because he was older or younger or whatever, right? But no, everybody's experience is different in the moment. Remember, we're all in different worlds. So if I'm your parent and your parent, you are going to have a very different parent than she, right? Very different. You're in a different family altogether. There may be some common denominators, like when mom beats up dad. Oh, that's interesting how that came out. Yeah, when mom beats up dad, you're both going to experience that, but from your different vantage points, and your mind is going to interpret it in a different way. And what somebody is crushed by it, why? Because of their inner reaction to it. Their inner take on it, their belief system that gets activated, that they believe about it. And somebody else can be actually strengthened by it in saying, this will never happen to me. I will learn about how to be in a relationship. I will get healthy. You see? And it's the same event. It's crushing for one, it's elevating for the other. It's like this always with life. And we cannot blame external situations and experiences for our internal reactions to them. Just a second. And when we realize that, we pull back the blame and we realize, well, what I suffer from is my internal reactivity, whether it's on the thought level or emotional level, behavioral level. We react to stuff, right? So when we realize that our unhappiness is caused because of how we've reacted to situations, then we can realize, oh, if I cause it, then I can uncause it. So let me finish this thought about buying Katie and I get to you. No, I did already, yeah. So she was in that same state, the succession of transformation through these stages, this pressure, and then she had a very quick birth. Profound birth, one out of, not from one dimension into the next dimension, but really pop out into freedom. And there often is a choice to make whether you want to stay in form. When it's really a profound transition like this, a profound epiphany, you have this choice whether you want to stay in form or whether you want to leave. And it's the beings whose hearts are developed, I believe, whose hearts are, who have this deep sense of oneness with their world, which happens to be their own creation, who decide to stick around out of compassion for the likes of us, the schmucks who need some little help, who can need a lot of help. Okay, you had your hand up.
I had a question. I can see like when you're adult and you have already belief systems that you experience like your parents yelling at each other or doing whatever differently from your sibling. But what if you're like very young and you haven't completely developed your belief system yet? Why do some take it much more harder than others?
Well, see, nobody comes into this world as a blank piece of paper, so to speak, right? Something has been written there with, secret ink. You can't see it, but it's there. These are called samskaras. They're seeds of karma, right? So we come, or this is the sense of the soul that comes into this body, right? And there's this script. And so we're born, every one of us is born into the absolute perfect family for us, right? And they're perfect in the way they're screwed up. And they're perfect in the way they screw us up, right? So psychology just looks at that, says, your parents screwed you up, right? But can't see that you had the perfect parents, because how else could you be yourself? And unless you're screwed up, how can you unscrew yourself? How can you get yourself right? And there are two levels to that. One is the repairing work on the personality, which is what you think you are, right? And that's good. That's psychology is for that, right? It's very good. But there's another level to that, and that is the realization that you're actually not that personality, that you're inhabiting this personality for a lifetime. But who is living in there? You see, it's like this is a vehicle for your consciousness. Consciousness is living in there, right? Mm-hmm. Or we can say the soul, because most people don't understand what soul is. Soul is that subtle awareness and has two aspects. One is wisdom and the other one is compassion. Right? So your capacity for full wisdom and full compassion is who you truly are in there. And at the core of that is God. So you're the manifestation of that divine essence that is in everything, in that form. Now, as long as we identify with body and personality and mind, we have the experience that we're inside of this shell here looking out through our senses and being in touch with this realm, right? And that can shift when we are subtle enough, and our understanding is subtle enough, that we realize that we're not this body looking out at the world, but our identification shifts and we realize, we're awareness itself, consciousness itself. And then suddenly we see consciousness everywhere. Then you look at somebody else, you look at her, and you only see yourself. Because you are consciousness and she is consciousness. Now, she may or may not be aware of that. She may think she's this body, but you're not fooled by that. And when you interact with her, you're fully aware that you're interacting with yourself in a different form. And you respect her form and her sense of individuality and separateness. That's not to be transgressed. But your heart knows that there's absolute identity here. Not identification, I was going to say there's that means you're still separate, right? Identity, there's no difference. This consciousness is blissful consciousness. The bliss aspect is the love aspect, right? Blissful consciousness is here and blissful consciousness is there. And there is no separation in blissful consciousness. Blissful consciousness is blissful consciousness. That's what we all are. When we're no, and what we will know that we are when we're no longer deluded. So again, what is our work? Is to reduce the delusion. And what's the delusion? Specifically what we think and what we feel, negative stuff. Right? And as we progress, it's like, you know, we do our work of clearing the mind and the emotional field. And what happens is we get to a place where we're just less burdened by that. And that burden of our believed stressful thoughts and emotions is what makes us small. And when they're no longer making us small, then it's like, ugh. And grace sets in. And grace is simply recognizing who we are. But it's so much greater by dimensions greater than we ever thought of ourselves. That's experienced as this like immense gift. Immense gift.
Here's a question on the chat. Linda asked, does this identification with the body happen naturally as we practice heart sourcing, or do we have to make an effort to see we aren't the body? Thank you.
Wonderful question. Yes, it happens automatically when we're practicing heart sourcing. Because in heart sourcing, you're already attuning yourself again and again and again to that place inside of you that is all about being in that oneness. You know, the heart, love. Love is one. In love, there isn't even someone who loves and someone who is loved. Love is that oneness that I was talking about. So in heart sourcing, thank you, Linda, great question. In heart sourcing, that's exactly what we do. We let go of the mind, which is always specific. This is this and this is that, and I am here and he is there, and so on, you know? It's the play of the mind. We just let go of that because maybe we just get tired of it after a while. We have a better place to go, right? And you go to the heart. And you can do it in little ways, you can do it in big ways, but you can do it again and again and again. And you just train yourself. You know, we've lived in the mind, the ego mind, for a long time, many lifetimes. So we just have to counteract that training and find that wonderful place where we can live and where we can love and where we even, if you just get a little smidge of some feeling of openness or clarity in your heart, you can build on that. Even the smallest little inkling, like it's like you're in the dark woods and there's no light. You're trying to find your way out of the woods. And there's no stars, there's nothing. And you're totally lost. All it takes is the tiniest little point of light and that you see between the trees somewhere. And suddenly your life has a direction. And that direction is the heart. And then immediately, when you have that tiniest little inkling of something in your heart, you may not even call it love by a long shot, just some little moment of something. You're already tasting the goal. Maybe it's a small taste, but it's a taste. It's just this little point of light between the trees. And now you know where to go.
Can you describe that little bit of something?
Yeah, that little bit of something.
Feel, look, or...
So in heart sourcing, what we do is first we recognize we're just caught in the mind, right? And we understand that it's beneficial for us to focus on the heart, maybe because we've been there already. So one time or other we felt peaceful, or we fell in love, or we had something, and then that went away again. But we remember, right? So that's really why people would do that, I think. If somebody has no recollection of this, then they probably choose another path, I would think. Or we just have an intellectual understanding of, yeah, I want to feel love more, okay? That doesn't mean you're going to feel anything yet, but you can work with the mind because we're all used to that. So we can imagine the point of light. It's not an experience yet, just an imagination, right? You imagine that point of light right here in the deepest core of your chest. But now a funny thing happens, because the imagination is then actually experience. Now you're experiencing your imagination. And because for once you're not imagining something that's stressful or dreadful that's going to happen, or some horrible in the past or whatever. No, you're just imagining a little point of light. And suddenly that's already an experience. And even though it was at first imagined, it is that little point of light that gives you a direction. It's your whole hill, you have 360 degrees, whether you don't know where to turn, or to just fall down and cry. But now you have this little point of light, you can move toward it. Now, even just by imagination, you have this little point of light and you can move toward it. And then that becomes, with repeated practice, it becomes more real. And then suddenly, at one point, you do it and you surprise yourself and you feel something. Oh. You feel something in the heart. Well, not a shocker. And then you may actually realize that you felt that many times but didn't pick it up. It's also very common, because we are actually often in the heart, but we're not aware of this because it's not logical. Or it's not like something that the mind can sink its teeth in. No, it's just a direct experience. And then it becomes increasingly enticing. Oh, I can sit here now, I'm driving my car, there's a red light, and I can sit here now and gripe about the traffic or the bad weather or what the wife said and da-da-da-da-da. Or I can just spend, 15 seconds going to my heart. Well, which one would you rather do? And you start having this awareness that that's an option. And so naturally, you just keep doing it, And it grows. Every time you do it, it's cumulative. You may have a big experience, you may have a tiny little experience. It may be a feeling at one point, it may regress again, and you only can imagine it because you're in a more difficult situation and you're more shut down because of it, right? So it may not, say, well, a week ago I felt it, now I can feel nothing. Well, it's okay, do it anyway, because it builds on itself. And then what happens is that the catastrophic imagination of your mind, which is twofold. It's like, I want this. I don't want that. I want this. I don't want that. I want this. I don't want that. It goes back and forth. Now, how is this catastrophic imagination? Well, you want this. You have a desire. You get it. You're going to lose it again. It's already built in. So you're going to be miserable. You're going to be miserable when you get what you want because you're going to lose it again. And you're miserable already because you don't have what you don't want. Or you do have what you don't want, rather. So either way, you're miserable up here. You have short-lived moments of pleasure that always turn back into pain. This is like pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure, lifetimes of it. And the place that doesn't move is here. And this is like an upside-down pendulum. The pendulum, pleasure, pain, right? But the pendulum hangs from something. There's a still place, and that's the heart. And that still place, metaphorically, we call that or we experience that as it becomes larger. Like that's the inside, the depth of the ocean. And up here, there's still the waves going on, highs and lows, pleasures, pain, da-da-da-da, you know? And if you're identified with that, life is rough. Because no matter whether you get what you want or you don't, you suffer. Either way. So it's guaranteed suffering when you're identified with that. But when you're here, you can let that go on, but you won't identify with it. That's what I was talking about when I talked about the ego of the sage. It appears like an ego, practical purposes from outside, right? Just a human being like everyone else. But from inside, there's nobody there. There is this, in the Bible, it calls it the peace that passes all understanding. That's the depth of the ocean. That's the heart. Oceanic bliss, absolute love, that recognition that you are that love, that unchanging, timeless awareness that is in everything and in which everything arises. And you look at other beings with absolute compassion and no need to interfere. You know, it's not like, oh, if you're one with me, I gotta go fix you. Don't think so. It's a different stage. You still think you're somebody, right? But you can. I had that experience one time when I just totally melted away. It was sort of one of those important preview experiences that you get sometimes. And I was with my ex-wife at the time. And I looked at her and I only saw myself in that form. Absolutely no difference. And she had some kind of gripe with me. So she came up talking, you know, like that. And I looked at her and I was like, all that I could feel was, what is the most skillful way to help her get free of this particular suffering that was in her mind? And she expressed it through words. And I wasn't very good at it at that moment. You know, I didn't know what to say to her because she believed her thoughts so strongly. Then all I could do is just give her a hug. And that resolved it for the moment, but it's not a long-term solution most of the time, you know. But yeah, love is always a good remedy. When in doubt, love. So, do we have a little bit more time?
15 minutes.
15 minutes, okay. Why don't we do, I should, wait, are there any questions? We talked about a lot of stuff here today. No, everything perfectly clear. Yes?
When you are like in that inner stillness, are you gonna be completely out of the other emotions, or you're gonna still have those emotions?
No, you see, it's a great question too. When you're in that place of stillness, are you going to have the emotions? You have them, but in a very refined way. Like the best teaching I had about that was when I was with my guru, you know, and he was so fully human and way beyond it. So there was a moment when he was sitting cross-legged and we had this small group, maybe 24 Westerners were around him. And one of them, American woman named Krishna Priya, sat right here by his right knee and held her hand on his knee. And she was just Krishna Priya, means the beloved of Krishna. So all she saw was Krishna looking at the guru, right? And she's like, just melting in this incredible sentiment of bhakti, right? Which is not an emotion. It's a higher octave than emotions, right? It's a divine sentiment of merging with the beloved in this deep way. And this is known in all religions, all devotional religions, you know. It's like in Christianity, that's very common. People have this type of devotional relationship with Jesus. It's wonderful, right? And she was sitting there. I was over here on this side, right? I was watching this. And she was just, it was just so incredible to watch because her eyes were like this, right? And she's just melting in love with him. And the thing about him was he never lived that stage. He just was this absolute melted love. And whoever could pick it up would just fall in love with him by just being around him. So now here she was, and she was drinking that in, and he petted her hand with this utmost absolute tenderness he was capable of. You know, it's like if you imagine somebody is aware that they are absolute love, imagine how tender they can be, right? So he was petting her hand, right? And so I'm sitting over there, right, watching this. And at that time, we were on this little porch, and there was 3 steps down, and then there was like the courtyard of the ashram. And a man who was an employee in the ashram who had been caught stealing potatoes or something. But this is an extremely poor area up there in the mountains. And Maharaji ran a tight ship. He was feeding people all the time, but that's different from stealing, you know? So this guy was brought in front of him and was standing down there, down from the steps. And Maharaji proceeded to take care of his business and started yelling at him at the top of his voice, very angry, and threw him out of the ashram with the command never to come back in this lifetime, which is crushing because all these people up there in the mountains knew who he was in terms of his spiritual, presence. But that's what he did. And this intense, fiery anger is going on. Talk about emotion. No, he didn't lose it. He wasn't all milk toast up there, right? And he was taking care of business. And I'm sitting over there, and we're all like, oh my God, let me make sure none of this hits me, right? This intense energy. And then I saw that this incredibly tender petting motion, it never stopped. There was not a tiniest change in it. So you have to understand that in that state of enlightenment, we are both fully divine. We are aware that we already are it, right? But we're aware, fully aware that we're fully divine and fully human at the same time. And we can live in both realms, right? Even and fully human means the human. What is the human really? It's this creature in between animal and divine, incorporating both. You see? So this awareness of both humanity and divinity also includes our animal state, the body state. It's all included and transcended, so you don't lose anything. As long as you're in the body, you're still in touch with the animal realm that our bodies are part of, the instinctual realm, all of that. So you don't lose anything. It just gets more and more and more. Each dimension that's greater incorporates the previous dimension, but it transcends it greatly. Right? So you don't lose anything.
So you kind of relate.
No, that's not true. I lied to you. You lose something. You lose your capacity to be really spazzed out about your suffering. Right? You lose the interest of being wrapped into the drama of the waves on the surface of the ocean when you're down here in the depths of the ocean in that love. But you participate in it, like he did with this guy who stole the potatoes. Right? You participate in it fully. Why? Not because you have to, but out of your compassion for the likes of us who are still caught in this delusion. You know, and when somebody is there, like this employee who stole from the ashram, you don't know what's going on in a moment like this. Yeah, he throws him out for this lifetime. But he got this being, this soul got to interact with an extremely high sage. And that leaves its mark. In some place, he might very well remember that in a different life and not steal potatoes that time.
I was just going to say that you lose that catastrophic fantasy.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you lose that. You lose a few things that are okay losing, that you may not mind to lose. Yeah, the catastrophic fantasy. It's like, you know, this way we just, you know, and that comes from the animal. The animal is trying, or even the Neanderthal is trying to figure out what might come out of that cave. If I live in this cave and the cave bear lives over there, you know, what might be happening here so I stay safe, you know? So that's deeply ingrained in the animal life, that trying to be careful, trying to be cautious. And Katie, with her fantastic ability with words, she says, don't be careful, you might hurt yourself. You know, but the animal is still doing that. And that's why we have this drive to figure out what could go wrong, right? But now the problem is that when we do that, the mind, the brain cannot distinguish between what we're imagining and what's real. And so it becomes stressed from that imagination. It doesn't see the imagination as imagination. It confuses it with reality. And then we're trying, you know, we have created imaginary difficult future. And then the mind has this demand on itself to resolve all of that future now, which is, of course, totally impossible. And the mind goes into overload. So there's a few things we're losing here, but nothing that's worth holding on to, nothing that is enabling you to be fully human and fully divine at the same time. But if you're good at it, you're going to hide the divine part. That's for you and the people maybe closest to you. But you're going to hide it. You're not going to walk around saying, oh, everything's wonderful, we're all so enlightened. You know, this is just, it's a trip, and it separates you from people. So true compassion sees that that's not the real thing. Katie had to work on this really hard because there was so much light coming out of her eyes. I remember that still the first time I met her. She rolled down the windows of her car and I looked at her eyes and I was like, boom. I fell into these eyes, and that was like our relationship was sealed. And she said to me a little while later, all I'm trying to do is be perfectly ordinary. For me, that's the highest state. And that really impressed me. You know, there was nobody here trying to be special at all. Quite the opposite. There was somebody extremely special who tried to be ordinary. And she is managing this quite well. When she was just here, remember when we picked her up at the hotel? She walks out there out of the lift all by herself, no big entourage, nothing, just her. And we spent the day together like just ordinary people. Quite an unordinary day, extraordinary day. So, should we do a quick one? Should we do a quickie? A heart-sourcing quickie? Okay. So heart-sourcing can be done as a formal meditation, which is what we're going to do now for a few minutes. But don't let it fool you. It can be done in every moment, at every time. You don't have to sit up straight. You can be in your car. You can be in the middle of a conversation. All it takes is to remember to bring your focus into your hridayam. Hridayam is a Sanskrit word. We translate it as heart, but we only have one word for heart and means so many different things. So I'm using the word hridayam more. The hridayam is the innermost core of the heart, and hrid means that. And ayam means I am. So here is the gateway to experiencing who and what we truly are. So bring your attention to the innermost point in the chest. And just notice your body sitting here and your breath moving in and out. And perhaps there's a thought or two moving through. Just watch them, let them pass. Notice any tendency to hold on to a thought, jump into it. Just let it pass. And come back to the body as a container of that heart awareness. And the breath as the living manifestation of the energy of that heart awareness that gives you life. So bring your awareness into that innermost heart, and perhaps you just can imagine a point of light deep, deep, deep in the chest, interior to any tensions or upset that can be present in the body. In this unmoving, brilliant place of the hridayam. And settle into that place. Breathe in and out of that point of light. And as the breath moves through that point of light, bring your awareness deeper and deeper into it with each breath. And as you relax into the heart, you may notice some sensation arising in the heart. And it could take on many forms. It could be a fullness, it could be an emptiness, empty of disturbance. It could be a softness. It could be like a shimmering light, expansive, radiant. And allow yourself to be attracted to that light, to that sensation in the heart. Know it to be perhaps the smallest taste of the unlimited, resilient love in you. move toward that love. Relax your caution. You cannot be hurt by this love. It is in you. It cannot be taken away. Rather, you can fall in love with love in you. And perhaps you notice that this sensation, this light in you has a natural radiance. It radiates, shines, flows from the heart into all the parts of your being, your physical body, your emotional body, your mental body. Allow yourself to be suffused in that love. Nurture yourself from that source in you. And know that you are in charge of your love, which means your happiness, which means your peace, your joy. You are in charge of it. No one, nothing can take it from you. And it's always there inside you. It is in fact what you are. And perhaps this simple recognition can help you to love you a little bit more. To be astonished by an insight of what you actually are. Not limited, but open in your very depth to what you have most deeply yearned for. This profound love is the medicine to heal all the ills of this world. And in this love, you can heal all the ills of your world. And make it a point, a decision to return here, to program the mind, to let go of its countless interests, and to follow disinterest, to come and drink from the source of the heart, to come to the place where the problems of the world are already resolved. So take a deep breath in, exhale, and again. Thank you. Namaste. But hold, don't go away. We're going to have some kirtan.
Yes.
Okay. Small intermission. We'll be right back on this channel.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I heard about singing to Shiva. Shiva is that I don't know that.
Yeah. Just keep going.
Shiva is that supreme consciousness, that depth of the ocean that Ramgiri talks about. And we're gonna say a few names of Shiva. Hara Hara is a name to Shiva. Mahadeva Shambho, two names of Shiva. And just basically invoking that depth, absolute nothingness and fullness of life. So maybe new words for you, but let's repeat it as we go, and then you join me, sing with me. Okay, it's not about how well we sing, but it's about how much we can tap into. Hara Hara Mahadeva Shambho Kashi Vishwanatha Gange 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 Hara Hara Mahadeva Shambho Hara Hara Mahadeva Shambho Hara Hara Mahadeva Shambho Kashi Vishwanatha Gange Hara
Shambho. Okay. Can you click like this? Okay, I don't know where. It's the wrong button. The red button. Oh, the red.